Africa without borders, it sounds noble, it sounds beautiful, it sounds like the dream our ancestors died for. But dreams start structure collapse, and right now Africa is not structurally free. Let me explain. You cannot build a borderless Africa on top of nations that are still operating under colonial blueprint. Yes, Africa can elect its own presidents. Yes, African flags fly high. But political independence is not liberation. The systems that govern Africa, our education, our land ownership, our trade routes, and even our economy were built during colonial rule. They were never dismantled. They were inherited. And a house built by someone will always serve the interests of those who built it. So when people talk about a united Africa today, I ask a simple question. United under what system? Because if every country on this continent is still economically tied to foreign powers, still dependent on Western financial institutions, still exporting raw materials and importing finished goods, then a borderless Africa simply becomes a larger marketplace for the same exploitation. Unity without liberation is not unity, it is an expansion of dependency. Every African nation must first confront systems within its own borders. Real independence requires dismantling colonial frameworks that still shape our economy, our governance structures, and our relationship with power. Liberation is not symbolic, it is structural. And that kind of liberation requires resistance. It requires political courage. It requires citizens who are willing to confront their own governments when those governments protect foreign power over African people. Look at what is happening in Ibrahim Traore's Burkina Faso. Whether people agree with every method or not, the message coming out of Burkina Faso is unmistakable. Sovereignty matters. Control over resources matters. Economic independence matters. And that is the first step towards a truly united Africa. Because unity cannot be built by people who are still economically controlled. Right now, what Africa can realistically build is economic solidarity, trade between African nations, skill exchange, resource cooperation, and industrial development that benefits African communities over foreign powers. That is the foundation. Because the reality is this: migration alone will never solve Africa's structural problems. When citizens flee systems instead of transforming them, those systems remain intact. And governments who fail their citizens face no resistance, and the cycle continues. If we want real change, we ought to confront unjust systems within every African country. And it'll come from liberation movements inside every African nation, from people reclaiming their land, resources, and economic control, from dismantling colonial systems and replacing them with African frameworks and African framework of governance and development. Only then, when Africa starts operating on systems designed for Africans by Africans, will a borderless Africa stop being a dream and start becoming a reality.
You know, I really think it's a good idea because if, for instance, you look at the economies of like Switzerland and Germany, so Switzerland and Germany are adjacent countries, right? And they have an open border system type of thing. But an open border doesn't mean that you just like let everyone and anyone through, but it just makes it easier for people within the continent to access South Africa, right? So this is good for trade. This is good for just general like how the countries coexist essentially. So I think that's important because if you look at like the exports that come from Africa, we have Africa's literally the largest exporter in the world. So it would make sense if we would capitalize on that and make use of the different resources that you have in different regions.
When I said that borders were not meant to keep people out, but they were made to keep people in, to trap you in, to control you, I was not talking about physically. I was not only talking about physically, but I was also talking about mentally. Because why every time when we speak about open border policy or African unity, it's someone in my comments saying, oh, so you want African unity in South Africa? You want people to come to South Africa? If you open the borders, everyone is going to come here. Well. Have you thought about going out of South Africa? Why does that not cross your mind ever? That you can actually go outside of South Africa. You can actually expand your businesses to other African countries. Africa is ripe for development. And instead of waiting for the Chinese to come help us develop, waiting for the Europeans, waiting for the Americans to come help us develop, why don't we branch out to go develop African countries? We have the skill sets and we have the capital. Why aren't you thinking, where are the South African entrepreneurs? Because this is what we're talking about when we say open border policy. We're talking in terms of business. Why aren't you thinking about how this could benefit you? Why aren't you thinking about business ideas? Why aren't you reading up on the laws of other African countries and how you can start your own business there? I mean, a lady was here, a Nigerian lady was here not too long ago telling us that in Nigeria, insurance is not the norm. They don't have a lot of that. And in South Africa, we have those galore. Why aren't people branching out? Such a huge population in Nigeria. That is a huge business idea. Why aren't we branching out? You're keeping yourself trapped. It's not only physically, it's even mentally, that you cannot fathom a reality where you can go outside of South Africa and succeed. People are always willing to go to China to go be teachers or start businesses in China, to go to Europe to distribute their skills there, go to Cuba, go there and there. But Africa is right here. Africa should be our playground. All of us. But you're thinking about people coming in only.
So you let someone who has bodyguards and VIP protection, who lives in a gated, expensive estate that has high walls with sophisticated security and protection to convince you about open borders. Before you can talk about open borders, your communities, your township, your suburbs must be so safe in such that you won't need the walls that are around your house. You won't need those burglar doors. You won't need those alarm systems. Then you can talk about open borders. Don't be fooled. Africa, more especially South Africa, is not ready for such. If when we talk of crime statistics, one of our major cities are always ranking number 1, number 2, I personally don't think that we are ready. What do you think?
This was the exact same reason why I said to South Africans, we cannot allow ourselves to be emotionally guilt-tripped and morally blackmailed into allowing illegal immigration into our country. Because this guy is basically mentioning countries like Zambia, Tanzania, Mozambique. These were the frontline states that supported South Africa during the apartheid struggle. And he's basically using the goodwill of those countries as a way to hold South Africans hostage and say, we have to allow millions of people to come into our country. That's not how it works. The liberation struggle did not serve as a justification to allow mass illegal migration into our country. It gave rise to a democratic South Africa that has its own laws, and those laws include that our borders have to be respected. So South Africans must never allow people to use our history of apartheid and to say, look at what we did to you guys, why are you being so mean? It's not rude and it's not xenophobic, moreover, to say that South Africa has borders, it is a sovereign nation, and it has laws that should be respected by everybody, even by the African countries that helped us in our freedom, in our battle for freedom. So never allow them to weaponize our history against us, and never allow them to weaponize our history as a way to hold us hostage as a people.
The influx of foreign nationals in South Africa is not by mistake, it's on purpose. They are trying to wipe out the original story of South Africa. They're trying to push the narrative that Southern African black people are not from here. They're not native to this land. They are from Central Africa, West Africa. So what they are doing now is they are pushing West African people, Central African people to come to Southern Africa and make children in Southern Africa so that eventually they wipe out any traces of native African people on this land. Then the narrative will be true that Southern African people are from West Africa. And then eventually, how do you think they are planning to take over South Africa? They are planning to rewrite the story so that eventually there is no one who has the right to fight for this land. It happened in America. It's the same playbook. It never changes. So we are aware of what they're doing. When we are aware of what they're doing, it helps us to not bite the finger that's pointing at the moon and miss the moon altogether. It is not the Africans that are coming to South Africa that are a problem. It is a system that is making it inhabitable on their land so that they flood to South Africa and attempt to find a better living. And in that process, they are working out this story of theirs. Ukuthi eventually, the idea is to wipe out native Southern African bloodlines.